Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome.
In our top story, Israel is at war.
We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Once the Jewish people were stateless. Once the Jewish people were defenseless. No longer. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come. The savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling, slaughtering families in their homes, massacring hundreds of young people at an outdoor festival, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Hamas terrorists bound, burned, and executed children. They are savages. Hamas is ISIS. And just as the forces of civilizations united to defeat ISIS, the forces of civilization must support Israel in defeating Hamas.
Schools remain closed at the time of this broadcast, and most Israeli communities have been ordered to shelter in place as barrages of rockets rain down on the Jewish state from Gaza and Lebanon. The Jewish state was ruthlessly attacked by vicious terrorists funded, trained, and armed by Iran. Officials from Iran reportedly held weekly planning meetings with Hamas ahead of the invasion.
The Israeli cabinet declared a state of war and announced Operation Swords of Iron to root out the Hamas terror infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. 360,000 reservists were called up to fortify Israel's defenses from the north to the south. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appealed to the people of Gaza to flee before the IDF commenced attacks on the Hamas terror group, which is notorious for embedding itself within the civilian population in order to use them as human shields. The IDF's Arabic language channels broadcast instructions on evacuation routes. It said the IDF has been forced to act against terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip, but it is not interested in harming civilians. It instructed residents to leave immediately for their own safety. The IDF published detailed maps of the areas and gave instructions to the Arab population on how and where to evacuate.
Leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran have publicly praised the massacre of Jews and called the attacks on Israel a legitimate defense. Just days before the attacks, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei gave a speech encouraging Palestinian terror and said that they would destroy the cancer Israel. In the wake of the attacks, the Ayatollah's regime erected billboards celebrating the murder of over 1,000 people in the Jewish state. Groups of Islamists paraded through the streets of Tehran, waving the Palestinian flag and burning the Israeli one. Dispelling any doubt as to Tehran's involvement, masked Hamas terrorists publicly thanked Iran for providing them with missiles, anti-tank weapons, money, training, and support to slaughter the Jews.
The Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon has announced that the Hamas attacks on Israel were a message to Saudi Arabia. The Gulf state has been in negotiations to normalize ties with the Jewish state and join the Abraham Accords. The bloody attacks were meant, in part, to serve as a warning to Riyadh not to sign any agreements with Jerusalem. The terror bosses are counting on Saudi Arabia not to stand by Israel in the war against Hamas. Several Arab countries issued warnings of grave consequences after Jerusalem announced a complete siege of Gaza.
Video footage of a Hamas commander calling for the destruction of all Jews and Christians has resurfaced, painting a frightening picture of the Islamic terror group's bigger plan. Mahmoud al-Zahar said, "The entire planet Earth will come under a system where there is no Zionism and no treacherous Christianity." He said that they are not talking about liberating the land alone, but the eventual Islamic domination of the whole world.
U.S. President Joe Biden immediately came out against the attacks on Israel and pledged America's support for its greatest ally. His words were backed up by bold action. The National Security Council expedited the first batch of military aid to Israel, saying it will operate hand-in-hand with the Jewish state, making sure that Israel's needs are met as fast as possible. The Pentagon also announced that America is sending additional equipment and resources, including munitions, to the IDF. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin ordered the American Navy's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier to be deployed off the coast of Israel. The USS Gerald R. Ford and its crew of 5,000 sailors were joined by U.S. cruisers and destroyers to guard Israel's maritime borders. The move was meant to prevent Iran from further supplying Palestinian terror groups with weapons and to deter the Iranian proxy army of Hezbollah in Lebanon from attacking Israel. Hezbollah, like Hamas, is funded, trained, and backed by the fanatic regime in Tehran. It has an arsenal of more than 100,000 missiles, which pose a grave threat to the Jewish state.
Arabs, Jew haters, and pro-Palestinian activists in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, London, Berlin, and Arab towns throughout Israel and the Middle East celebrated the death of over 1,000 Jewish men, women, and children. Times Square was filled with Palestinian flags, swastikas, and people chanting "Globalize the Intifada" and "Smash the Zionist state." They screamed the slogan of terror groups from the river to the sea, effectively calling for the destruction of Israel and the murder of all Jews living in it. Similar celebrations were held in London and in Arab communities throughout the world, where participants lit fireworks and handed out candy to celebrate the slaughter of over 1,000 Jews. The organizers of the Times Square event, which was supported by the Democratic Socialists of America, moved their protests across Manhattan to attack a vigil for the Israeli victims. Hundreds of New York City police were dispatched in an attempt to keep the peace.
The White House has been ridiculed for releasing $6 billion to Iran, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, just weeks before the attacks on Israel. Critics condemn Joe Biden for allowing this massive cash influx to the radical Islamic Republic, despite crippling sanctions imposed on Tehran because of its rogue nuclear program. Several lawmakers claim that by transferring the $6 billion, the Biden administration is complicit in funding the attacks on the Jewish state.
Jewish communities around the world remain on high alert after the attacks in Israel. The National Security Council issued a warning to Israelis abroad and Jewish communities around the world that they could be targets of further attacks. The New York Police Department stepped up its security of synagogues and Jewish institutions, and Germany and France also reinforced security for their Jewish communities. A group of Israeli tourists were gunned down in Alexandria, Egypt, on the day following the attacks on Israel. 2 Israelis were killed and 1 was injured in the ambush.
The United Arab Emirates, that normalized ties with the Jewish state as part of the Abraham Accords, has come out against Hamas attacks on Israel. A statement released by the UAE said the Hamas attacks against Israeli towns and villages near the Gaza Strip, including the firing of thousands of rockets at population centers, is a serious and grave escalation. The statement from Abu Dhabi went on to say that it is appalled that Israeli civilians have been abducted from their homes and taken hostage.
Dozens of Israeli expats rushed back to Israel after their homeland was attacked. Inspiring stories of former IDF soldiers paying exorbitant prices for airline tickets and leaving their families abroad to defend Israel have begun to circulate. A 35-year-old Israeli teacher at a Jewish school in Manhattan said that he and 50 other Israelis rushed home when news of the war hit. He said, "We have not been in the reserves for years because we're living abroad, but now all of us will be volunteering to serve." He said, "This is a fight to protect our home and our families."
The Congressional Israel Allies Caucus has issued a statement of strong bipartisan support for the Jewish state after the devastating attacks on Israel. The IAC was founded in 2006. It was the first legislative caucus of what has now become a network of more than 50 Israel Allies caucuses in governments around the world. These groups work to mobilize political support for Israel based on shared Judeo-Christian values. A statement released by Representatives Doug Lamborn, Brad Schneider, Chris Smith, and Brad Sherman says the heinous attacks by Hamas come just one day after the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and it is a stark reminder of the existential threats that Israel faces in the region. The American lawmakers said, make no mistake, we are united in our bipartisan commitment to ensure the United States Congress continues to stand alongside our closest ally in the Middle East, and that the Israeli people have all the necessary resources to protect their sovereign rights to self-defense. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Ariel Kahana. He is the chief correspondent for Israel Hayom. Ariel, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be here.
Israel's at war. It was a huge shock. This last week has been something that no one ever expected. What happened?
So actually, Josh, I would say it's the most bleeding day Israel had since it was established. From some aspects, this war is even worse than Yom Kippur War, which happened 50 years ago. When you and I are talking, we know about hundreds of Israeli casualties, a few dozens probably people who were kidnapped into Gaza, of course, by Hamas army, actually. An unbelievable shock, I would say, for us, for the Jews here in Israel, for the army, for the IDF. Events we couldn't believe will ever happen here in Israel. And now we are beginning to arrange to fight back, to save as much people as we can. It's going to be very long. It's going to be very tough. I believe other people will die, but I think there is 100% consensus by Israelis to fight back and to put an end to this awful regime of Hamas in Gaza, because it's one of the most brutal regimes all over the world. Now everyone can see it, and it's just time to stop them once and forever.
No one can understand how this happened. We're known for our army. We're known for our intelligence gathering. How do we get caught so off guard?
So I believe at this point it's a little bit too early to know. I mean, I know some details that not explaining exactly why happened and what happened. In history of war, all over the world, you have surprises. I mean, in America, they had Pearl Harbor, 9/11. Here in Israel, we had, as I said, 50 years ago, Yom Kippur War. It happens. There definitely will be lessons to be learned, but we know it happened. And again, now everybody are focused to fight back.
Everyone's talking about Iran. The head of Hezbollah said it was Iran. Hamas said it's Iran. Why are we fighting Hamas? Why aren't we fighting Iran? Who's funding this? Who's supporting all this? What's going on?
I guess, according to what we know until now, that maybe Iran was paying for that. But since Hamas soldiers, brutal soldiers, I would say, were so professional, they didn't prepare that in the last few weeks or months. It looks like a battle that was prepared for years. They trained, they had exact maps of places they wanted to reach out to. So of course Hamas is supporting, of course Iran is supporting them, but it was not only Hamas. And first of all, we have to take them out of our country. We have to take them out of the Gaza Strip. And then maybe we could face the other huge challenge, which is Iran.
People have been warning about this day for 20 years, since the disengagement. This policy of appeasement where we can run away and let the Hamas take shape. And then we go in and we, blow up a couple empty parking lots and the international community says, get out of there, and then we run back. Is this time different? Are we going to take out Hamas? What do you think is going to happen on the ground?
So the cabinet decision last night was very different from all what we saw until today, and it was to take Hamas down from Gaza Strip. In my opinion, it was the right decision to take, and actually it should have been taken, as you said, many years ago. As you said, our policy since this engagement in 2005 was very soft, was too soft. Actually, we let them because we wanted to avoid this horrific war, so we actually let them to build such a giant army in the Gaza Strip, and the results are what we face in these awful days.
We hear a lot about Arab Israelis now getting messages that they need to rise up, that they need to fight back. There was a terrorist attack in Egypt. Is this going to spread to Israel, inside Israel, to Jews around the world? What is the prediction about that?
Look, everything can happen. We know, as Jews, we have our history. That's the reason why the state of Israel is here. Because if we will not fight for ourselves, no one will do it. And when we fight here in the land of Israel, it's also for Jews all around the world. So it definitely might go to the scenarios you suggested. But again, we are billion% aware that we have to take care and watch out and be ready to worst events that can happen.
Most of our viewers are Bible-believing Christians, our greatest friends around the world. What can they do to stand with Israel in these trying times?
So I would say, first of all, that I'm also a Bible believer. So actually we have the same base. Of course, we believe in God. And what we do need now is, first of all, I would say moral support. So if people around the world will say what Israel is doing is right, and Israel has all rights to fight, even if the Arabs are paying a high price, and they should pay a high price because of what they did. So we have to have Americans and others around the world saying it publicly that Israel has full right to protect itself, even if it's going to take weeks and even months. So maybe at some point we need money, but at the moment when you and I are talking, it's first and foremost moral support.
Ariel, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
My message to the audience is that we shall overcome. It's very bleeding days, very painful days for us here in Israel, but we will overcome, we will win, we will take Hamas down, and we will show a lesson to our enemies that they should not try us once again, because although it's hard, although many people are dead, unfortunately, we have the power, we have the strength, with the support of friends around the world, and we will fight back and win.
Thank you, Ariel, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning into Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the truth from Zion.
Today, we go on a journey to one of the most geopolitically significant regions in the Middle East, the Golan Heights. This lush green mountain range is not only a beautiful place for wildlife to flourish and people to hike, but it is a strategic location for the State of Israel. The Golan Heights has been at the center of numerous diplomatic negotiations and even violent conflicts stretching all the way back to the end of the Stone Age. In modern times, the Golan Heights was under the control of Syria, who occupied the territory until Israel reclaimed it during the Six-Day War in 1967. But the story of the Golan Heights begins in antiquity, with numerous mentions in biblical text and ancient historical records. Jews have had a consistent presence in the area since biblical times. Archaeologists have discovered 120 ancient synagogues throughout Israel, with 30 of them in the Golan region. In the Bible, the region is called Bashan, with Golan being the name of just one of its many cities. The passing of centuries has seen control over this area change hands multiple times between different empires, states, and powerful individuals. In biblical times, the kings of Israel fought the Arameans for control of this territory. Then it was ruled by the Assyrians, followed by the Babylonians. Afterwards, it came under the influence of Persia, and later was even controlled by Alexander the Great around the year 332 before the Common Era. In the 7th century of the Common Era, it was conquered by the Muslims, and in the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire took over the area and made it part of Ottoman Syria. The French then got their hands on the land, but when the Mandate ended in 1946, it became part of Syria until 1967. War broke out on June 5, 1967, following repeated attacks by Palestinian terrorist groups. Syria allowed Palestinian gunmen to freely operate from their territory. The mountainous and elevated vantage point gave terrorists an unobstructed view as they ruthlessly fired upon Jewish civilians living in the area. Israel liberated the Golan Heights during the last 2 days of the Six-Day War. Many consider it a miracle as the Israel Defense Force was fighting on multiple fronts. As the Syrian army deployed along the border, the Israeli military launched a preemptive strike. Israeli forces gained the upper hand and pushed their way north, taking over the disputed territory. A ceasefire was declared on June 10, 1967, and Israel effectively had taken control of the Golan Heights.
Israel on the Golan Heights constrains the capabilities of Iran and Syria to invade, to attack the pro-US Hashemite regime in Jordan. And we had a precedent back in 1970 when Syria invaded Jordan. Jordan was no match militarily to Syria. The US called Israel. Israel deployed forces to the Golan Heights, and within 48 hours, without exchanging a single bullet, the Syrians withdrew back to Syria. It was Israel's posture of deterrence on the Golan Heights which made the day for the pro-Hashemite regime in Jordan and deterred the pro-Soviet regime in Syria.
By 1970, there were 12 communities of Israelis living in the Golan, and they were protected by the military until 1981, when Israel passed the Golan Heights Law. This extended basic Israeli law to people living in those areas. In 2019, the United States played a key role in legitimizing Israel's claim to the Golan Heights. The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump officially recognized Israel's sovereignty over the area.
The American recognition of Israel's sovereignty on the Golan Heights is critical for American, not only Israeli interest. Israel on the Golan Heights constrains the maneuverability of anti-American Iran, constrains the maneuverability of anti-American Russia and Syria.
Today, the Golan Heights is a treasure for Israelis and all who come to enjoy it. The land boasts wineries, farms, important archaeological sites, national parks, and a picturesque countryside that is not under endless threat. The people who reside there are free to live in their ancient homeland, which will always remain part of Israel. And now, shining light from Israel.
The Dead Sea, located just 25 miles from our holy capital of Jerusalem, is the lowest place in the entire world, 1,500 feet below sea level. Just off the main highway towards the Dead Sea is an old British road connecting Jericho and Jerusalem. It leads to Wadi Kelt, a dried out riverbed known here as Nachal Prat. Just behind me, you can see a beautiful complex hanging on the cliffs of Wadi Kelt. And this is a remnant of a thriving monastic community that lived here in the Judean desert during the Byzantine Empire 1,500 years ago. And it's believed by Christians that it was built on top of the cave in which Elijah the prophet hid from the wicked queen of the north, Jezebel. And we can read about this story in the book of Kings in the Bible. While heading back to the main highway from St. George's Monastery, make sure to stop in the Jewish village of Mitzpeh Yericho to enjoy an overlook to the modern city of Jericho, where archaeologists have discovered the biblical site where Joshua and the Israelites conquered the city of Jericho over 3,000 years ago. And if you're feeling adventurous, residents here in this small Jewish community offer Jeep rides throughout the Judean desert, including the monastery, and of course overlooks here to Jericho. Come with me as we head down towards the Dead Sea. Right now, we're at sea level, which means we've descended 3,000 feet. Let's go visit the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, literally the lowest place on earth you can walk on dry land, 1,500 feet below sea level. And what caused this massive valley here? The Syrian-African Rift, the largest fault line in the entire world, spanning 6,000 kilometers. It goes from Africa all the way up into Turkey. It's what formed the Red Sea, which comes out of the Indian Ocean. That's the port of Aqaba and the city of Eilat, the most southern city here in Israel. The Arava Valley, the Sea of Galilee, the Hula Valley, all part of this large system called the Syrian-African Rift. The Dead Sea is one of Israel's most popular tourist sites. And the reason being is that the water here is so hypersalinated, 33% salt minerals, that you can't sink. You literally float on water. It's like being completely weightless. But also, the health benefits of floating in the water are world-renowned. Some people even go to the shores of the Dead Sea in order to gather its mud, rub it all over them to experience and enjoy its healing properties. Here at the Dead Sea, the biblical narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah take place. After the split of Abraham and Lot, where Lot comes here, and due to the misbehavior of the people who are living here, Sodom is destroyed with fire and brimstone, and what is left behind but pillars of salt. There are many activities that visitors to the Dead Sea can experience, from visiting the national parks of Masada, Qumran, or hiking through the majestic trails of En Gedi. One can take an ATV tour through the Judean hills here in the desert. Or a really special activity is to do a boat tour or kayak tour along the shores of the Dead Sea to places that are inaccessible by any other way. Once there, you can mine salt crystals from the ground. For those of you who are looking to spend more than a day here in the region of the Dead Sea, in Ein Bokek there are literally over a dozen hotels, from 5-star resorts to more budget-friendly accommodations. Thanks again for watching. And on your next visit to Israel, make sure to visit the region of the Dead Sea.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.